The cafe was alive with the soft hum of conversation and the occasional clink of cups and saucers. It was a warm place, small but inviting, with sunlight streaming through the tall windows and dust motes dancing in the rays. The smell of fresh coffee mingled with the faint aroma of baked goods, creating a comforting environment that made people linger longer than they had planned. There was a piano tucked into the corner of the room, an old upright with slightly chipped keys and a few scratches on its surface, giving it character and charm. It was mostly ignored by the customers, though a few curious eyes occasionally drifted toward it. The waitress moved quickly between tables, balancing a tray of steaming drinks. She had been working at the cafe for several years, and though she loved the place, she often felt unnoticed. Her life was a mix of small routines and quiet dreams, and she found joy in the little things. A customer who smiled, a perfectly poured cappuccino, the gentle rhythm of the piano when she sometimes dared to play it after hours. Today, like most days, she wore a simple uniform and a tired but determined expression. A hush fell over the cafe for a moment when a new customer walked in. He was tall, dressed neatly in a suit that seemed expensive without being flashy. There was an air about him, a calm confidence that immediately drew attention. People glanced briefly in his direction, whispering under their breath, recognizing him as a famous investor who had made headlines for his smart decisions and unexpected generosity. Despite the quiet curiosity of the cafe, he seemed entirely at ease, scanning the room with calm, observant eyes before settling near the piano. The waitress noticed him almost immediately. She had seen his picture in the news and on social media, but seeing him in person was different. She felt a flutter of nervousness, unsure if she should act differently or if she would even be noticed. She approached his table with a polite smile, asking if he would like something to drink. He responded with a warm smile that immediately put her at ease. His voice was gentle, easy to listen to, and carried a tone of casual friendliness that made her forget, for a moment, the stress of the morning. He ordered a coffee, black and something sweet to go with it. While she prepared his order, he glanced around the cafe, stopping at the piano. His eyes lingered on it with a mixture of curiosity and a hint of challenge. When he spoke again, it was not about the coffee or the pastries but about the piano. "I've always wondered who in a place like this can play," he said. There was a playful tone in his voice, a challenge disguised as a casual remark. The waitress felt her heart skip a beat. She had played the piano countless times, but mostly alone, with no audience except for the quiet hum of the cafe and her own imagination. The idea of playing in front of someone, especially someone so famous and composed, made her palms sweat. She forced a small laugh, trying to brush off the feeling. "Not many, I'm afraid," she said, keeping her voice light. He leaned back slightly, studying her with an amused expression. "I dare you to play something," he said, his words carrying both encouragement and a spark of mischief. It was not a demand, but it felt like a dare, a challenge that was hard to ignore. The other customers had begun to notice the exchange, some turning their heads to watch the interaction, curious about how it might unfold. She hesitated, glancing toward the piano. Her mind raced. What if she made a mistake? What if she embarrassed herself in front of everyone? And yet, there was a tiny thrill in the thought, a pull toward the music she loved so much. The famous investor watched her patiently, as if he had all the time in the world and genuinely wanted to see what she could do. His calm demeanor, his quiet interest, and the gentle encouragement in his eyes made it harder to refuse. The cafe seemed to grow quieter, the chatter dimming as people sensed something unusual was about to happen. Even the staff paused in their tasks, curious and slightly anxious. It was one of those moments where ordinary life slowed down, and everyone felt they were waiting for something memorable. The waitress took a deep breath, steadying her nerves. She nodded slightly, acknowledging the dare without words, and began to move toward the piano. Her footsteps were tentative at first, each one echoing slightly on the wooden floor. She felt every gaze on her, but she focused on the instrument in front of her. The piano had been a friend in lonely moments, a source of solace and expression. Today, it would be her bridge from nervousness to courage. As she positioned herself on the bench, she felt the familiar texture of the keys under her fingers, cold and smooth. The world outside her immediate focus faded slightly, leaving only the piano and the challenge she had accepted. The first few notes were tentative, careful, almost hesitant. She allowed herself to feel the music, letting it flow naturally despite the eyes watching her. There was a moment when a wrong note slipped in, and she felt a rush of panic, but she reminded herself to breathe and continue. Slowly, the melody grew steadier, more confident, each note carrying a piece of her emotion and experience. The famous investor leaned forward slightly, his eyes never leaving her hands. There was a smile on his face, subtle but full of admiration. He seemed genuinely impressed by her talent, and that small gesture of acknowledgement gave her a boost of confidence. The cafe, which had been filled with the low murmur of conversation and movement, became absorbed in the music. Patrons stopped mid-bite, employees paused mid-task, and even the barista behind the counter leaned on the edge, listening intently. She played for a few minutes, letting the music tell its story. It was a mixture of simple tunes she had learned in her youth and a few notes improvised from her heart. The energy in the cafe shifted. There was a warmth and connection forming between the performer, the observer, and the audience. The famous investor's presence added weight to the moment, but it was the music itself that captured everyone's attention. As the last note lingered in the air, a hush remained for a heartbeat longer than expected. Then, applause began, soft at first, but growing steadily as more people joined in. The waitress felt a rush of relief and pride, her earlier nervousness melting away under the genuine appreciation of those around her. The famous investor clapped as well, giving a nod of approval that felt more personal than any words could convey. The moment was more than just about the dare. It was about recognition, courage, and the unexpected joy that could appear in the simplest of places. The waitress smiled, a genuine smile that reached her eyes, feeling a connection not only with the audience but with herself. She had taken a risk, embraced a challenge, and discovered a small but meaningful victory. The cafe seemed lighter, warmer, and more alive after that performance. People returned to their conversations and drinks, but the memory of the music lingered in the air. The waitress stepped back, feeling the weight of the piano fade but carrying with her a newfound confidence. She had faced a moment that was outside her routine, and it had transformed the ordinary day into something memorable. The famous investor continued to watch her for a moment, his smile still present, before turning his attention back to his coffee. There was a sense of satisfaction in his eyes, as if he had not only witnessed talent but had played a small part in bringing it into the light. The waitress returned to her duties, her steps a little lighter, her heart a little fuller, and a quiet anticipation for what might come next lingering in her mind. The sun continued to stream through the windows, illuminating the dust motes, the piano, and the cafe in a soft glow. Life went on, but something had shifted. In the simple act of accepting a dare, playing music, and sharing her gift, the waitress had created a memory that would ripple through the cafe for weeks to come. The story of the day the famous investor dared the waitress to play the piano had just begun, and there was a feeling in the air that it was only the start of something remarkable. The morning continued to unfold with its usual rhythm, but for the waitress, the energy in the cafe had shifted. Her hands still tingled from the notes she had played on the piano, and a quiet excitement lingered in her chest. She moved between tables with renewed confidence, smiling more easily at customers and greeting them with warmth that seemed brighter than usual. The famous investor, seated near the piano, had taken a sip of his coffee but did not leave. Instead, he watched her with a calm and curious expression, clearly enjoying the impact of his playful dare. The waitress tried to focus on her tasks, pouring coffee, serving pastries, and attending to the needs of the customers. But her mind kept wandering back to the piano and the unexpected moment of courage she had experienced. She could feel the eyes of a few patrons still lingering on her, their attention filled with a mix of curiosity and admiration. It was strange, she thought, how one small act could draw so much focus and make a person feel seen in ways they never expected. The cafe staff exchanged quiet glances behind the counter, their expressions a mixture of surprise and amusement. They had seen their colleague shy and reserved many times before, and now here she was, radiant and commanding the attention of everyone in the room. Some whispered quietly, teasing one another about how they had never imagined she could hold such a presence, especially in front of a person who was famous and intimidating to many. The investor finally spoke again, his voice breaking the gentle hum of the cafe. He leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "That was quite something," he said, smiling. "I didn't expect that at all. You have a real talent. Have you played for many people before?" The question caught the waitress off guard. She shook her head, feeling a bit shy under his genuine curiosity. "Not really," she admitted. "Mostly just for myself, sometimes for friends or family, but not in public like this. I've always been a little nervous about it." The investor nodded thoughtfully, his eyes still focused on her. "Sometimes the best moments come from stepping outside your comfort zone," he said. His words were simple but carried a weight that resonated with her. It wasn't just a compliment. It was an acknowledgement of the courage she had shown. The waitress felt a warmth spread through her chest, a mixture of pride and relief. It was a rare feeling for her to be recognized in such a genuine way, and it made the cafe seem brighter, the conversations lighter, and even the clatter of dishes somehow more harmonious. She returned to her work with a renewed sense of purpose, moving with more ease and grace as she served the customers. As she moved through the cafe, she noticed that a small crowd had begun to form near the piano. Some patrons were whispering among themselves, others were taking out their phones to capture a photo or a video, not wanting to miss the moment that had unfolded. The energy in the room was changing, shifting from casual cafe chatter to something more alive, a sense of shared experience that connected everyone present. The investor's presence continued to have an impact. He was not intrusive, but his quiet interest encouraged the waitress in a way that made her feel supported rather than judged. There was a subtle exchange happening between them, a silent acknowledgement of the connection formed through music and courage. Even though they had spoken only briefly, the interaction felt meaningful, and it reminded the waitress of the power of small moments and the ripple effects they could create. Feeling emboldened, the waitress began to imagine what she could play next. She considered a few simple tunes that she knew by heart, pieces that would bring a smile to anyone listening. There was a playful thought that crossed her mind. What if she improvised a short piece, letting the music flow from her emotions without worrying about perfection? The idea made her fingers itch with anticipation. Music had always been her private escape, and now it felt like an invitation to share that escape with others. She glanced at the investor, who met her eyes with a small nod, encouraging her silently. His presence was reassuring rather than demanding, and she realized that his earlier dare had not been about testing her skills, but about inviting her to step into the light and experience the joy of sharing her gift. She felt a surge of gratitude, recognizing that this interaction was more meaningful than she had initially imagined. As she approached the piano again, the cafe seemed to hold its breath. Customers stopped their conversations, staff paused in their duties, and the subtle tension of anticipation filled the air. She sat on the bench, adjusting her posture and letting her fingers hover above the keys. For a moment, time felt suspended, and the only thing that mattered was the connection between her and the music. The first notes were soft and tentative, but as she allowed herself to relax, the melody grew smoother and more confident. She played a familiar tune, one that was simple yet expressive, allowing the emotions she had felt that morning to flow through her fingertips. The cafe responded in kind. The atmosphere shifted from casual to intimate, the kind of quiet energy that made everyone feel as if they were part of a special moment. The investor's expression remained calm but observant. He was clearly enjoying the performance, and the subtle nods and faint smiles he offered with each note reinforced her confidence. The music became a dialogue, a way of communicating without words, connecting her with the audience in a way that transcended ordinary interactions. Patrons leaned forward in their seats, captivated by the unexpected beauty of the performance. Even those who had not initially paid attention found themselves drawn to the piano, caught by the sincerity and emotion in the music. The waitress felt a sense of liberation, realizing that her fears and doubts were no longer holding her back. The piano was no longer just an instrument. It had become a bridge between her inner world and the people around her. Minutes passed like seconds as she continued to play, each note carrying a piece of her story. She experimented with small variations, adding flourishes that felt natural, letting her instincts guide her. The famous investor watched quietly, clearly impressed by her ability to convey emotion and presence through music. His calm demeanor and attentive observation created a safe space for her to explore and express herself fully. When the final note lingered in the air, there was a moment of silence, a collective pause as everyone absorbed the experience. Then, gradually, the applause began, growing in intensity as patrons and staff alike expressed their appreciation. The waitress felt a rush of warmth and relief, knowing that her performance had touched others in a genuine way. The investor clapped as well, offering a nod of recognition that carried more meaning than words could convey. The cafe seemed transformed. The energy had shifted from routine and familiarity to connection and shared experience. Customers returned to their conversations, but the memory of the music lingered, creating a sense of unity and joy. The staff, once skeptical, now looked at the waitress with newfound respect and admiration, recognizing not just her talent, but her courage and grace under pressure. As she returned to her duties, the waitress felt a quiet sense of pride and accomplishment. She had accepted a dare, faced her fears, and discovered a new confidence in herself. The famous investor remained at his table, sipping his coffee and watching the flow of the cafe with an expression of contentment. It was clear that the interaction had been meaningful for both of them. A brief but powerful connection formed through the simple act of music. The day continued, but the atmosphere in the cafe remained subtly different. Patrons whispered about the performance, sharing their impressions with one another. The staff moved with renewed energy, inspired by the moment they had witnessed. And the waitress, carrying a sense of fulfillment and joy, moved through the cafe with a lightness in her step, knowing that a small act of courage had the power to create a memorable experience for everyone around her. Even as the sun shifted and shadows lengthened, the music lingered in the air like a gentle echo. The moment had passed, but its impact remained, leaving a sense of possibility and hope. For the waitress, it was a reminder that courage and creativity could open doors to unexpected experiences. For the investor, it was a quiet affirmation that sometimes the simplest interactions carried the most profound significance. As the day wore on, life in the cafe returned to its usual rhythm, but there was a shared awareness of something special that had occurred. The waitress continued to serve with kindness and attention. The staff worked with renewed enthusiasm, and patrons carried with them the memory of a magical morning. The piano, once an overlooked piece of furniture, had become a symbol of possibility and connection. And the story of the day the famous investor dared the waitress to play would be remembered long after the final note had faded. The waitress returned to the piano later that morning, feeling a mixture of nervousness and excitement. She had taken a few deep breaths and wiped her hands on a towel, trying to steady the subtle trembling that came with anticipation. The cafe had grown busier, with more customers streaming in, but instead of feeling pressure, she felt a sense of focus that made everything else fade into the background. She perched on the piano bench, her fingers hovering above the keys, waiting for the right moment to begin. The famous investor remained seated nearby, watching her with an expression that was calm yet attentive. He didn't rush her or offer suggestions. He simply gave her the quiet encouragement that allowed her to feel in control of the situation. The staff had begun to notice the pattern. The waitress seemed to be coming alive through the music, and the energy of the cafe was changing with each note she played. She started with a simple melody, something familiar that allowed her to ease into the rhythm of the performance. The first notes were light, almost tentative, but as her confidence grew, so did the strength of the music. Her fingers moved more freely across the keys, exploring variations she hadn't dared to try before. The sound of the piano filled the room, weaving through the chatter of the cafe and gradually taking over, captivating everyone present. The patrons responded almost instinctively. Conversations slowed, heads turned, and even the staff found themselves pausing to listen. Some customers, who had been quietly working on laptops or scrolling through phones, now leaned back in their chairs to take in the music. The cafe was transformed from a simple place for coffee into a shared space of emotion, connection, and attention. The waitress could feel the difference immediately. The fear she had felt earlier was replaced by a sense of flow, a rhythm that carried her beyond self-doubt. The investor's presence had a subtle but powerful effect. His attention was steady, almost meditative, giving her the freedom to experiment and express herself fully. It was as if he were acknowledging the courage it took to play in front of others while silently supporting her journey. This calm observation allowed her to let go of the anxiety and embrace the music, turning it into a story she could share with everyone in the room. Feeling braver, she began to add a few improvisations, exploring chords and harmonies that were new to her. Her hands moved more confidently, and with each note, the room responded. Some patrons smiled knowingly, recognizing the beauty of the spontaneous creation, while others were silently impressed by the skill and emotion she poured into her performance. Even those who had initially been skeptical were now drawn in, captivated by the authenticity and vulnerability of the music. The cafe staff had begun to gather closer to the piano. They weren't obstructing her view or interrupting, but their presence added a layer of warmth and support that the waitress felt deeply. Their quiet encouragement, expressed in smiles, nods, and small whispers, created a sense of community around her. It was no longer just a personal expression. It had become a shared experience, a collective moment of appreciation for something beautiful and unexpected. The waitress noticed the investor leaning back slightly, a small smile playing on his lips. There was no judgment, no expectation, only genuine recognition. She realized that this simple interaction had changed the dynamic of the cafe and her own sense of self. The dare he had given her was more than a playful challenge. It was an invitation to embrace courage, creativity, and the unexpected joy of sharing her gift. As the music continued, she felt her confidence grow even further. The improvisations became more intricate, with subtle shifts in tempo and dynamics. Each note seemed to carry a part of her story. Her hesitations, her excitement, her joy, and her sense of connection to those around her. The cafe responded with an almost reverent silence, broken occasionally by soft murmurs of admiration or quiet clapping from someone moved by the melody. She paused briefly mid-performance, letting the music hang in the air, then continued with a more expressive section. This part was riskier, requiring precision and emotional depth, but the presence of the investor and the attentive audience gave her courage. Her fingers danced across the keys, finding rhythms and harmonies she had not known she could play. The music became a conversation, a dialogue between her, the piano, and everyone listening. She could sense the audience's engagement, their shared breath and attention, and it fueled her performance further. The cafe was fully immersed in the moment. Patrons who had entered for a quick coffee were now standing to watch, and some had moved closer to the piano to feel the music more fully. Staff members had stepped away from their usual tasks, captivated by the unfolding scene. There was a sense of magic in the room, a rare alignment of courage, talent, and genuine human connection. The waitress realized that what she had feared might be embarrassment had turned into something profoundly rewarding. The investor remained quiet, but his eyes were bright with appreciation. He had seen performances before, many in formal settings, but there was something uniquely captivating about this scene. The authenticity, the vulnerability, and the courage of the waitress playing freely in her familiar environment. His quiet observation was a reminder that recognition often came in subtle ways, and that genuine moments of talent and bravery had their own power. Encouraged by the response, the waitress allowed herself to explore even more daring variations. She combined elements of tunes she loved with improvisations that reflected her own feelings. Her heart raced with excitement, and she felt a deep sense of joy that had been rare in her day-to-day life. Each note was a small triumph, a declaration of her skill and courage, and she could feel the collective energy of the cafe amplifying her own. As the piece reached its climax, she played with intensity and emotion, letting go of all hesitation. The cafe seemed to hold its breath as the music filled every corner, carrying with it the story of the morning, the courage of taking a dare, and the beauty of sharing something deeply personal. Patrons and staff alike were swept up in the moment, their attention fully captivated by the performance. When the final notes faded, there was a pause, a suspended moment of silence in which everyone processed what they had just witnessed. Then, as if a dam had broken, the cafe erupted in applause. Clapping, cheering, and expressions of admiration filled the room. The waitress felt a surge of pride and relief, her face glowing with happiness. The risk she had taken, the courage to play in front of others, had paid off in a way that was more than she could have imagined. The investor clapped too, quietly but with unmistakable sincerity. He leaned back, clearly impressed, and offered a nod of acknowledgement. His expression communicated respect and admiration without words, reinforcing the sense of accomplishment the waitress felt. The connection between them, established through the shared experience of music and courage, felt real and meaningful. The cafe, though returning slowly to its normal rhythm, retained a sense of vibrancy. Conversations resumed, but with a heightened sense of energy and positivity. The staff looked at the waitress differently now, with a mixture of admiration and pride. Patrons left with smiles, carrying with them the memory of an unexpected, inspiring performance. The piano, once a quiet corner fixture, had become the centerpiece of a story that would be remembered long after the day ended. The waitress stepped down from the bench, her legs a little wobbly from the adrenaline but her heart full. She had faced her fears, embraced her talent, and connected with others in a way that felt transformative. The cafe had become a space not just for coffee and pastries, but for courage, creativity, and shared human experience. The morning's events would stay with her forever, a reminder that taking risks, accepting challenges, and trusting oneself could lead to moments of genuine magic. The investor continued to watch quietly, satisfied with the role he had played. His dare had been more than a test. It had been an opportunity, and he had witnessed the power of embracing it. The waitress returned to her duties, carrying the glow of the performance with her, aware that the experience had shifted her perspective, her confidence, and her sense of possibility. The cafe had become a stage for courage and music, and the story of that morning was far from over. The moment she lifted her hands from the piano keys, the cafe seemed to exhale. For a heartbeat, the room was completely still, as if everyone was suspended in the beauty of what they had just witnessed. Patrons who had been quietly observing exchanged wide-eyed looks, smiles spreading slowly across their faces. Even the barista behind the counter had stopped mid-pour, eyes fixed on the waitress, and the staff who had been bustling about now stood quietly, absorbing the unexpected magic that had filled the room. The famous investor remained seated near the piano, his expression calm but deeply impressed. He had seen many performances in his life, in concert halls and private gatherings, but there was something different here. This was unpolished, raw, and genuine. The courage, the spontaneity, and the emotion the waitress had poured into the music created a resonance that could not be replicated with rehearsed skill alone. It was an authentic moment, and he appreciated it fully. The first clap came from a patron near the window, hesitant at first but growing in confidence. Soon, more people joined in, the clapping becoming louder, more enthusiastic. The cafe erupted into applause, a mixture of joy, admiration, and surprise. The waitress felt a rush of warmth, her face flushing with pride and happiness. The nerves that had accompanied her at the start were gone, replaced by exhilaration. She realized how powerful it was to embrace vulnerability and share her talent. Staff members hurried over, their earlier skepticism replaced with genuine excitement. They patted her on the back, whispered congratulations, and offered enthusiastic smiles. The transformation was remarkable. The same people who had previously viewed the piano as a quaint decoration now saw it as a portal to joy and connection. The waitress could feel their energy, the collective admiration and encouragement, filling her with renewed confidence. Some customers were standing now, capturing the moment on their phones. It was no longer just a performance. It had become a shared story, a memory that people wanted to hold on to. The chatter resumed, but it was different this time. Lighter, filled with laughter and expressions of amazement. The cafe had changed, subtly yet unmistakably. It had become more than a place to drink coffee. It was now a space where courage and talent could shine, where ordinary mornings could transform into unforgettable experiences. The waitress returned to her station, a little breathless but glowing. She could feel the attention, the admiration, and the genuine pride of those around her. Even the patrons she had never noticed before approached her with kind words. "You were incredible," one said quietly, eyes shining. Another whispered, "I didn't know anyone could make the piano sound so alive here." The words flowed around her, warm and encouraging, reinforcing her sense of accomplishment. The famous investor finally rose from his seat, walking slowly toward her. He did not make a show of it, but there was a quiet gravity in his movements. When he reached her, he offered a smile that conveyed appreciation and respect. "That was remarkable," he said simply. "You have a gift, and you should never underestimate it." His words were sincere, free from exaggeration or flattery. They carried a weight that made her heart swell, a recognition that felt deeply personal. He paused, scanning the cafe briefly, then added, "Sometimes, people have talent that is hidden away, waiting for a moment like this. I'm glad I got to witness it." There was no pressure in his tone, only admiration and encouragement. The waitress nodded, feeling a mix of gratitude and humility. It was rare to receive acknowledgement in such a meaningful way, and she realized how much it mattered to have someone see her for who she truly was. The staff had gathered around the piano by now, their excitement palpable. They shared smiles and quiet remarks, whispering among themselves about how impressive the performance had been. Even the manager, who had initially been busy with paperwork and overseeing operations, now approached with a broad smile. "That was extraordinary," the manager said, clapping her hands lightly. "You brought something special to this cafe today." Everyone noticed. The waitress felt her chest expand with pride, a glow of happiness spreading through her. Customers continued to approach, some with gentle applause, others with words of admiration. The cafe was alive in a way it rarely was, buzzing with energy that was both subtle and contagious. The piano, once just a quiet corner fixture, now seemed like a centerpiece, a symbol of courage, talent, and unexpected joy. The waitress could feel the weight of the moment settling over her, a mix of accomplishment, gratitude, and exhilaration. She looked around and noticed small gestures of kindness everywhere. A staff member quietly handing her a cup of water, a customer offering a smile of encouragement, someone jotting down notes about the performance in a notebook. These small acknowledgments created a sense of belonging and recognition that made the morning feel extraordinary. The cafe had become a microcosm of what happens when people share their gifts and embrace vulnerability. The famous investor finally took a seat again, sipping his coffee with a satisfied expression. He watched as the waitress moved among the tables, attending to her duties with newfound confidence. There was a subtle pride in his gaze, a quiet acknowledgement that he had witnessed a moment of genuine human connection and talent. His presence had been more than a dare. It had been an invitation, and the outcome was a shared experience that touched everyone in the room. The waitress felt a gentle shift within herself. She realized that the applause, the smiles, and the words of admiration were not just about her skill on the piano. They were about her courage to step forward, to take a risk, and to share something deeply personal. She understood that these moments of bravery had the power to transform ordinary experiences into extraordinary memories, not just for her, but for everyone who had been part of the morning. The cafe continued to hum with activity, but the energy was different now. Conversations carried a lighter tone, laughter seemed more genuine, and even the movement of staff and patrons felt synchronized with a newfound rhythm. The piano, with its chipped keys and familiar worn finish, had become a symbol of courage and connection, a reminder that beauty could be found in unexpected places. As the morning progressed, the waitress felt a quiet sense of fulfillment. She had taken a chance, embraced her talent, and allowed herself to be seen in a way she had never done before. The reactions of the staff, the patrons, and the famous investor had reinforced a sense of purpose and pride that would stay with her long after the cafe returned to its usual routine. Small interactions continued to punctuate the morning. Patrons stopped to offer kind words, staff members shared quiet congratulations, and the investor occasionally nodded in approval. Each gesture, no matter how small, carried significance, reinforcing the impact of the performance and the shared experience that had unfolded. The cafe had become more than a place to serve coffee. It had become a space of connection, encouragement, and inspiration. By the time the morning rush began to wane, the atmosphere in the cafe was filled with a lingering sense of magic. The waitress felt a quiet pride as she looked around, observing the smiles, the gentle chatter, and the subtle energy that had been created. She understood that a single moment of courage could have ripple effects, touching the lives of everyone present in unexpected ways. The investor finally stood, placing a few bills on the table as a tip, not for the coffee or the pastries, but as a personal acknowledgement of the performance he had witnessed. He gave a nod, a smile, and a word of encouragement before leaving the cafe, his departure quiet yet significant. The waitress watched him go, feeling a mix of gratitude and inspiration. The interaction had been brief, but its impact would resonate for a long time. As the cafe settled back into its normal rhythm, the memory of the morning lingered. Patrons who had been present carried the story with them. Staff members whispered about the performance, and the piano remained, ready to be played again, a symbol of possibility and courage. The waitress returned to her duties with a sense of fulfillment and confidence, knowing that she had experienced something remarkable, something that would stay with her and everyone else in the room for a long time. The afternoon light spilled into the cafe, casting warm patterns on the tables and floor. The atmosphere was calm now, but the echoes of the morning's extraordinary events still lingered. The waitress moved through the cafe with a sense of quiet pride. The piano, once a simple fixture, now seemed like a symbol of possibility and courage. Every time she glanced at it, she remembered the rush of emotion, the thrill of performing, and the applause that had followed. It was more than just music. It was a reminder that moments of bravery could create lasting change. Customers came and went, some whispering about the morning's performance, others curious about the piano in the corner. The staff smiled at her with a newfound warmth, a quiet acknowledgement of the courage she had shown. Even the manager, who had been so busy earlier, stopped by her station to offer a nod and a small word of praise. The cafe felt alive, not just because of the usual business but because of a shared experience that had touched everyone there. She took a moment to breathe, leaning on the counter and watching the patrons. There was a sense of connection in the air, subtle but undeniable. Strangers had become witnesses to something personal and meaningful, and that had created a bond, however brief, between all of them. The waitress realized how powerful it was to step out of her comfort zone and share a piece of herself. It wasn't just about the music. It was about courage, vulnerability, and the joy of being seen. A few children who had been visiting the cafe approached her, eyes wide with curiosity. One asked if she could play the piano again, and another clapped excitedly. She smiled warmly, feeling a surge of happiness. For a moment, she let herself play a few notes, gentle and light, just enough to bring a smile to their faces. The children giggled, clapped, and danced slightly in their seats. It was a small, innocent joy, and it reminded her that music could touch people in ways words could not. The famous investor had left earlier, but his presence was still felt. The interaction had been brief, but the impact was lasting. His simple dare, his quiet encouragement, and his attentive observation had been enough to inspire her to take a leap of faith. She thought about the importance of such moments in life, how a single encounter could change perspective, ignite confidence, and leave a ripple effect. She realized that sometimes, all it took was someone believing in you, even for a few minutes, to unlock hidden potential. Throughout the afternoon, the cafe continued to hum with activity, but the energy was different. Patrons lingered a little longer, conversations carried a lighter tone, and staff members moved with a renewed sense of purpose. The piano, always present, had become a symbol of inspiration. People who had only come for coffee were now reminded of the beauty in unexpected moments, of the joy in taking chances, and of the connection that could emerge from something simple and sincere. The waitress found herself reflecting on her journey. She had started the day unsure of herself, nervous about being noticed, and hesitant to embrace her talent. Now, she moved with confidence and calm, aware of the power of courage and expression. She thought about the ripple effect of her performance. The smiles, the applause, the stories that patrons would carry with them, and felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It was a rare and precious feeling, one that she would remember long after the day ended. As she wiped down a table, a regular customer approached with a warm smile. "I couldn't help but notice earlier," the customer said softly. "Your playing was beautiful. It made this morning unforgettable." "Thank you." The words struck her, simple yet profound. She nodded, feeling a lump in her throat, grateful for the acknowledgement. The exchange reminded her that small acts of bravery could resonate far beyond the immediate moment, touching lives in ways she had never anticipated. The staff gathered briefly, exchanging quiet comments about the performance. They laughed softly, recalling their initial skepticism and how quickly it had turned to admiration. The waitress joined them, feeling a sense of camaraderie and pride. Together, they recognized that the day had been special, not because of extraordinary talent alone, but because of the courage to share it, the willingness to embrace vulnerability, and the openness of the people around them. Later, as the cafe quieted down, she found herself sitting at the piano again. This time, she played not for anyone else, but for herself. The notes flowed freely, unhurried and expressive, a personal celebration of her journey. The sound filled the room softly, a gentle echo of courage and joy. She closed her eyes, letting the music carry her, remembering the moments of fear, anticipation, and exhilaration. Each note was a testament to her growth, her willingness to take risks, and the beauty of embracing her gift. The afternoon turned to evening, and the cafe gradually emptied. The last few patrons left with smiles and kind words, leaving the waitress and the staff to reflect on the day. The energy remained, lingering like a gentle warmth that had been created through shared experience. The waitress felt a quiet gratitude for the people around her, the cafe that had become a stage, and the music that had given her courage. The piano, standing quietly in the corner, seemed to hold the echoes of every note she had played, every emotion she had expressed. She cleaned the cafe methodically, each motion carrying a sense of calm and reflection. The events of the day had taught her something profound, that courage and authenticity could open doors, inspire others, and create memories that lasted far beyond the immediate moment. It wasn't about fame, recognition, or approval. It was about the willingness to step forward, embrace vulnerability, and share a piece of oneself with the world. As she prepared to close for the evening, she glanced at the piano one last time. The day had been extraordinary, filled with music, connection, and personal growth. She felt a deep sense of satisfaction, knowing that she had faced her fears and allowed her talent to shine. The cafe, the staff, the patrons, and even the brief encounter with the famous investor had all played a part in a story that she would carry with her forever. Locking the doors, she took a final look around the cafe, the soft glow of the lights reflecting off the tables and chairs. It was a space filled with memories, a place where courage had turned an ordinary day into something unforgettable. She smiled, feeling a quiet sense of fulfillment, and walked out into the evening air with her heart full. The story of the day, of the dare, of the music, and of the courage to take a chance had come to an end, but its impact would linger, a reminder that even the smallest moments of bravery could create a lifetime of memories and connections.